weather often. But today we're going to talk about innovation. And I just want to open up. Of course, I always start with an innovation fun fact. I will introduce our panelists today. And Dr. Acaroglu, did I pronounce that correctly? Yes. And then we'll have Anuj lead, and Abram and Anuj lead us with our moderation today. So our innovation fact today is, did you know, is on the 5th of February, we will be opening applications for our innovation fund, and students can apply. There's a $10,000 in prizes will be distributed. And the innovation fund is specifically to target early stage innovation. So think value proposition and technical proposals that will, where students will be working on them the following year to build prototypes, models, simulations to prove out their value proposition and their technical proposal. So the application opens February 5th and closes March 5th. We will provide some workshops for students to participate so they know how to build their value proposition, and happily some coaching if you're interested. And then we will be announcing the finalists on April 1st, and then beyond that, having the finalists participate in our innovation showcase on April 22nd, announcing the winners on April 23rd. So I just wanted to have you keep in mind, if you're a student and you can build a diverse team from across the university, diverse in many respects, gender, ethnicity, academic background and expertise, even generationally, graduate students, faculty. And if you can put together a team around a specific compelling societal problem, we would love to fund you if it's feasible and viable. So please, we are inviting you to submit and develop those proposals. If you have more questions, you may contact me. And again, we'll be putting the application up on February 5th. It will be posted on the Innovation Center website. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have Nakaya Rucker. Nakaya, hello. She is the Director of Communication and External Relations for the library, and she will be moderating our questions and provide student insight. And we have Abram Anders, who is the co-founder of our flagship Innovator series and does research on innovation, as well as directs the writing program for Iowa State University. There's Abram, and our regular flagship moderator. And we have Professor Anuj, who is certainly a co-conspirator and part of our innovation team, and professor in the College of Design. She will be, she and Abram will be co-leading the session today with Dr. Leyla Acaroglu. And just to give a few brief introductory components, Dr. Acaroglu is founder of the Disrupt Design, the Unschool, and a co-project farm in Portugal. She's won a host of awards, and her work was named one of Melbourne's 100 most influential people. And her systems-based thinking, coupled with communication techniques, are featured in several publications, including the New York Times. She is the founder of 2 design agencies, Disrupt Design in New York and Melbourne-based Eco Innovators, as well as the Unschool. So we are really excited, as one of the topics that Dr. Acaroglu discusses is sustainability, which is has been expressed as a real priority for our students, a real interest for our student innovators. So without too much more, I will, Anna, turn it over to you. Dr. Acaroglu has about 20 minutes where she would like to introduce some concepts and ideas, and then we'll take it from there.
Great, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with you from London. We were just discussing the weather, and I was hearing that you guys are quite in snow there. So yeah, I'm going to start off by giving you a little bit of an overview of my work, and then hopefully that will inspire some questions and conversation for the rest of the session. So as was introduced, I run a couple design agencies. I do too many things, but somehow manage to keep up with them all. And my goal is to make positive change. Like, that's what I want to do in my life and my career. And for me, positive change is creating a future that is equitable and sustainable and possibly even regenerative, and certainly filled with a lot of creativity and innovation. So basically, what happened was I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my career when I was younger. I was very interested in social issues like humanitarian issues and things. And then I felt like I think a couple. Anna, I think you should maybe mute your because your microphone's making a noise. Yeah, so basically, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I kind of decided I was going to be a designer because I liked creativity and I wanted to find a way of using creativity to have a career that was going to be fun and interesting, I guess. And what happened was I started off my career in design and innovation, and I basically then forged the last 20 years of my life, forged this kind of crazy international career, which I'm going to share with you, which culminated in 2016 with being named Champion of the Earth by the United Nations, which was an extremely hilarious experience because I didn't even know this was a thing. But each year they give away 6 of these highest accolades that they offer from the United Nations. And there I am. I know there's a gender problem going on there. But I was really proud to receive it for my work in advancing science and innovation. And so when I received this award, which I didn't know existed, but obviously was very proud to receive, I thought, well, I wonder if I get like superpowers now, like genuinely. And it was kind of a joke, but me and my colleagues in my design studio decided that we all have superpowers to make change in the world. And it was just that I happened to be in a particular time and place and receive this award, but that we all have this ability to make a positive impact on the world around us. We just need to understand what those tools are and let any skill focus on it and develop it and get it to be something that we have in our tool belt to be able to make change. So we made this like superpower activation kit, which you can grab from our website. It's totally free. Thousands of people have downloaded it. It's basically like these 12 everyday, everybody has skills that we believe are superpowers for changing the world, like the power of learning to love a problem versus avoiding it. And we have these really cute little simple actions you can take. The power of framing a positive future. In fact, I think right now in the world we live in, the ability to imagine and work towards a future that is better is one of the most rebellious acts we can do, because it is very hard to maintain a positive outlook when there's so much negative conversation going around. So it's like the rebellious status quo busting thing to be like, no, we're going to figure this out. And I want to be part of figuring it out. You know, the power of being wrong. I think far too often we see failure or, you know, effing things up as somehow being embarrassing. And maybe it is a little bit and it stings, but hidden inside every wrong turn or, you know, disastrous attempt at something is often an amazing nugget of wisdom that makes us better at what we do. So these are, you can download them, there's 12 of them. But I really felt like what I wanted to do was find a way of everything that I have achieved. I like to try and like turn into a project, a creative project. It's very meta. But basically, when I first started my career, like I said, I wanted to solve problems. I wanted to be a creative person, but I had no idea about how to apply that in the world. And all I knew was that I didn't like the way certain things in the world worked. I hated remote controls. I thought they were stupid. It was like all of these designers keep creating the same thing with all of those buttons. Who knows what the buttons are for? I don't use 2 buttons on a remote control. And then you can never find the ones you actually want. So I was really motivated by this idea that I would learn the skills in design school to be able to solve these everyday problems. But then I had this like really intense experience, which was I went to this engineering class and my engineering professor was like this lovely old guy who was not very enthusiastic. But one day he happened to be like, okay, you're going to like learn about this thing called the Gaia theory, which I must admit sounded extremely hippie. And I was like, oh, this sounds really boring. But in that class, he kind of essentially just really casually mentioned that there's this scientific theory called the Gaia theory, that everything in nature is interconnected and that we live on an organism, like one whole interconnected organism, which is the Earth. And so every action we take will have impacts. And I literally, my mind exploded. Like it was the first moment in my life, I was 19 years old, where I was like, holy crap, like, why don't I know this? And so it really completely shifted the trajectory of my life, because I hadn't really thought about environmental issues. I hadn't thought about any of these things before. I hadn't been given the agency or the challenge to do so. And so then I kind of started this personal quest, and I went and read all the books I could find and got really obsessed with this like cause and effect relationship, right? Like I use something like just an everyday water bottle, and before I never thought about where it came from or what impact it was going to have. In fact, it just put it in the trash and it disappeared. It never had any kind of direct impact on me until now. Of course, we know that like ocean plastic waste and climate change and all of these things. But in the past, there was the hole in the ozone layer and there was acid rain. So environmental issues don't go away. They just change and transform. And so for me, like this was the cool, exciting thing that I wanted to then dedicate my life to, was like, how do we design solutions that make the world a better place so that in the future, we don't keep having more and more of these problems to solve, that we actually kind of come about, like always get it better each time we evolve as a species. So I, done a bunch of things, but one most recently, have a design agency called Disruptive Design based out of New York. And we take commissions to design projects that make change. But because I believe that everybody has the capacity to make change in the world, even if you're not a designer. So designers have these amazing tools, right? Like communication tools and physical forms and materials, but we're all constructing our world. Every action we take has an impact. Everything we buy, everything we do or don't share on the internet now is like basically either creating a movement towards a really crappy idea or reinforcing a positive one. So, this kind of like dynamic relationship that we all have with the world is becoming more and more evident to us. I think the internet is really making that very obvious. And that if we have the skills to see how that we can build our own capacity to love problems and make change and be a kind of positive citizen in the world, it doesn't have to be like some hippy dippy thing, but that it's like we have integrity, and that what we contribute to the world, whatever innovation or business or career we pick or choose or work in, we're always trying to make things a little bit better for our fellow humans and for the planet we all share. I received this ridiculous award 12 years ago, which was just after that first journey. So I had this realization and I was like completely overwhelmed. And so I basically went and like absorbed everything I could about sustainability and about nature and how it worked. I kept being like, why didn't anyone tell me this? Right? Like, how did I not know that like everything has this dynamic? It was anyway. And so and I was like invited to go to this innovation challenge in the region, because I grew up in Australia, in Southeast Asia. And it was like my first experience of solving an innovation challenge. And it was so fun. Like we got put in a cross-cultural group of people. I was in like a team with a young guy from the Philippines, and we got given this like really complex design challenge, and we had to solve it. And I was just hooked after that. I was like, that's it. I want to spend my life solving complex problems and making really fun solutions. So I've done lots of different things. I've created animations, I've written handbooks, I make a lot of toolkits, and everything I do, I just try to use my experiences to make positive change. And it's garnered me a lot of really fun things. Like I've traveled all over the world, I've spoken at events, and like most countries, I've really had a lot of, I've done a main stage TED Talk, I've done several TED Talks, and like I've had a lot of fun. I mean, now it's a bit boring because I spend most of my time sitting in my apartment, but hopefully that'll change. And one of my early experiences was this really small project. So I was like 20, I think in this photo, I'm like 24 maybe. And I was just finished university, and there was a design competition to turn one of these old pillars. You can't kind of see in this photo, but this is a really small pillar that would open up, and people used to sell newspapers from them. And then of course, like newspaper sales obviously stopped. And the city, this is in the city of Melbourne in Australia, were like, what are we going to do with these pillars sitting in the city? So I responded to this design competition, and I pitched to create this like micro trading environment where I only sold like locally made products that were environmental. And I was only going to be like one Christmas that I did it, but it became so popular. Like we became a tourist destination because it was like this magical thing that opened and, filled with delights. And so we actually stayed open for a couple of years, and then it actually got the street trading policy in the city of Melbourne changed. Like the mayor got really into it. And now this old pillar, I don't have a photo of it. This old pillar is actually a crepe stand. It's been a crepe stand for like 5 years. And young entrepreneurs can rent these pillars as little micro trading spaces to test their projects or ideas, people selling jewelry or new products. So this was my first experience of like using creativity in it, to solve a problem, and then having this really positive feedback loop. Like, wow, holy crap, I just got like a policy change, not by lobbying, but by just demonstrating how to do things. And so then I started making educational tools that I also feel like one of the big problems with sustainability, and this was from my own experience, is it's not really that exciting. And so it's often kind of easy to avoid it. And so I created these hilarious animations. This is a cell phone who has an existential crisis because he's abandoned, and he goes to see Dr. Fraud, who gives him past life regression therapy and prescribes him a better design, basically. And this animation series, I did 3 of them in the end, and that helped get the local curriculum in Australia and Victoria, where I used to live, changed so that sustainability and life cycle thinking was included in the high school curriculum. And so that was like my second win, and I was like, wow, this is great. Like, and none of these things are like, none of them are like intentional. It's not like I sit there and I'm like, okay, I'm going to make this pillar and then that's going to change that. It's kind of like the creative energy helps create change. And then a few years later, I was commissioned by the National Gallery of Victoria, which is our like premier art institute, to create an interactive exhibition. This was called the E-Waste Autopsy, where you can see here, this is all old keyboards. We actually collected all of the keyboards that the gallery was going to dispose of, and we ran this interactive exhibition where people could pull them apart, and then we made a piece of art, and then we weighed all of the different components based on plastic or technology to see what would be recycled or what would not, and kind of did a whole like categorized autopsy of it and figured out that none of it would be recycled. And e-waste is a huge ecological issue globally. And so this was a really interesting project because I don't think I have a photo, but like it was people loved it because people love breaking things, basically. We had tools and we were like, here, smash these keyboards apart. But also it was a really immediately obvious how poorly designed these products are. Like they are so hard to get apart. They are filled with like 5 to 10 different types of plastic. So they're definitely not being recycled. And for the average person who interacts with multiple forms of technology in a day-to-day, they're never understanding to how poorly designed they are and therefore how unlikely they're going to be recaptured. So this is really simple intervention kind of creates this conversation. And this really got me inspired to work on what's called experiential education. So like not in traditional education, but just that our experiences teach us how to exist in the world. And so I started really working a lot more on that. On the right there, it's actually, I designed this this game. I have them here, these play cards. I actually designed these at the same time I was doing that, dust on everything here, when I was doing that pillar. And the National Gallery highlighted my work as kind of like they just picked these 8 designers and were like, oh, this is the future of design, like using creativity to make change and stuff. So they made these giant versions of the cards. So yeah, I'm really passionate about this idea of how we can all make change in the world. And so I created this school called the Unschool of Disruptive Design, and it's intentionally like a non-school school. Where we mess with people's minds to help them make change in the world. And really, until COVID, it was highly experiential. So whilst we do have an online school, the majority of our learning happened in these very immersive experiential projects. So we ran so far, I mean, I started, I think 6.5 years ago now, and we ran 10 fellowships in 10 different countries. So the last one was in Kuching. We've been to Sao Paulo in Brazil. We've been to where have we been? We've been to Mumbai in India, and people come from all over the world to have this extremely immersive, intensive 7-day experience. You can watch videos of all the different projects on our website, and they're really amazing. Like, of course, like I'm biased here, but the projects are as good as they are because of the people who come to them. Like the people show up from all over the world and they just like completely inspire me because I'm reminded that people from every different cultural background, socioeconomic position, give a shit about the planet and are willing to use creativity to help make it a better place. And that is incredibly inspiring. So here's some images of different projects from around the world. So the Unschool, we have an online school, obviously, but we mainly do these experiential things. And I learned a lot about how powerful, you know, collaboration and experience are in creating change, and also being inspired to push yourself to do better and to make more change. So yeah, basically the Unschool, we've been all over the world. This is, here is a photo of my fellow champion of the earth. His name is Acaroglu. He's the one being interviewed, and he did the world's biggest beach cleanup. You may have heard of it, in Veerasola Beach in Mumbai. It's the beach that they cleaned, then the turtles came back. It's all over social media, and it's like this. It's insane because I actually went, I think 2 years ago now, and half the beach was clean, and the other half of the beach was like plastic as high as my waist, just piled. And these volunteers every weekend had managed to clean this beach. It was like amazing. But the thing is that we have this huge problem, right? Like, ocean plastic waste is a visceral reality of our global waste pandemic. And we're very much living in a time where consumption and disposability are driving a lot of our environmental issues. And those issues aren't just like, okay, so yeah, there's plastic in the ocean. And that's really tragic for people who like to go to the beach. But it actually really dramatically affects us because we're part of a food chain, and you know, microplastics. So these plastics don't degrade; they slowly break down into smaller and smaller parts, and those microplastics are then absorbed by fish, and then we eat fish. I don't eat fish; I'm a vegetarian, but I eat salt. And recent studies have shown that nearly all table salt have microplastics in it. So the thing is that what I've learned is that it can be really depressing, but it's also really fascinating how quickly our impacts kind of permeate the rest of the world and then come back to bite us in the ass, basically. And COVID has been shown, thanks to research at Harvard University and other leading institutes, that there are several factors that created the zootopic disease jump to our species. One is climate change, because animals are migrating a lot faster. Two is habitat destruction, because we've created these things called islandized land, where, you know, we want to make a road. So we put a road through a natural environment, and then that severs these two parts. So these animals end up in these microcosms, and diseases can breed and blah, blah, blah. But we're also closer because there's so much development. Humans are quite interfacing with wild animals a lot more. Anyway, the point is that it's kind of like partly our fault. So, you know, it's like cause and effect relationships. So I had this experience though, when I was named champion of the earth, and I went actually with Afros to clean up a beach in Cancun, which was the location where they were doing the award ceremony. And I had this really embarrassing thing happen, which was I hadn't really spent much time in tropical locations, and I saw a coconut, like an actual whole coconut, and I said to this guy who was helping us do the beach clean, like, oh wow, look, a coconut, like thinking somebody had just dropped a coconut, I don't know. And he was like, yeah, that's how the palm trees grow. And I was like, palm trees grow from coconuts? Which sounds extremely dumb, but it had never occurred to me before that a coconut is actually the seed for a palm tree, which made me realize that I had no idea how nature worked, and which was quite shocking given I'd just been named champion of the earth. Of course, I knew the basics. I'd done biology. I understood the basics, but I really didn't understand this intimately. So I decided to use that embarrassing experience as another motivator for a project. And I went and I took on this old abandoned farm in Portugal and converted it into an eco farm with all different, I fully restored it in a sustainable design, because I'm a sustainable designer. And it was a ridiculously sized project. I spent 3.5 years converting it using all natural and local materials. It was an amazing nightmare. You can see in the background there some gates that I handmade out of old trees. I learned a lot. This is early on. You can see I'm like kind of traumatized by my own experience. It was one of the best and weirdest experiences of my life, because I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I'd never farmed a thing before. I'm also not an architect or an interior designer. I studied product design and spent most of my life designing like toolkits. So it was this incredibly difficult experience, but very rewarding. These are some of the final results. It's an incredibly beautiful place. And I learned such an amazing amount, and the farming and learning how to participate and interact with nature, it literally changes every cell in your body. Like, aside from the fact that I lived off everything I produced, and I understood very firsthand how hard it is to grow food, I also, you really can't help but become part of a system when you're in this kind of custodian role. So this is like my first ever cucumber. It was like so exciting. I really had no idea what I was doing, but I learned these really, really important things, which is that there is absolutely no such thing as waste in nature. Everything in nature is the building blocks for something else. And also from a nature's perspective, death is actually not really death. Like, a chicken would die, and yes, that would be sad that the chicken was gone, but the chicken's body was like the resources for something else to grow. And when you're kind of in that system and you're participating in it, it's actually like, I know it sounds so cheesy, but it's really magical because it really changes your idea of how everything around us is working and how we can contribute and participate in that. I also learned you get out what you put in. And I mean that in the most like realistic sense, because the less work I did, the less productivity I had. The more work I did, the more incredible, beautiful, wonderful things I got to enjoy. But it was really hard work. And that in nature, everything is designed to optimize life. And this to me was one of the most amazing design principles. Was, you know, I'd have a cabbage and a cabbage would grow, but it would have like fallen over like this. And when I was watering it, the leaves were designed, no matter how the cabbage was, to funnel water perfectly to the base of the plant, right? So all it cared about was like sustain cabbage, funnel water to base of plant. And so its design principle was to figure out that solution no matter what obstacles it faced. So anyway, I spent 3.5 years doing that. And last year I was invited to the annual assembly for the United Nations and was able to present there about using science and innovation as a platform for sustainability, talking about a project that I did with the United Nations called the Anatomy of Action. And the thing for me is that sustainability and the idea of designing products and services and basically our entire economy and systems around us to be like sustainable is really about figuring out how to work within the planetary, what we call the planetary boundaries. Like, there's one planet that we live on. There's no other known planet in the entire universe that has life. We haven't discovered it yet. And until then, I think it's really important that we figure out how to not, you know, screw this one up. And so sustainability is really about figuring that out. And it's an amazing design challenge, because if we only have one Earth, but we use resources, and this red line shows how fast we use resources at this exponential rate, then we will eventually run out of resources, or we will have destroyed the system so much it can't replenish itself. And that's really the dangerous outcome that we want to avoid. So for me, this concept of figuring out like the impact of our actions, one really known one is the ecological footprint, but also we have life cycle assessment and lots of different tools that help us understand how the things we do as individuals, or the things that companies do, or even whole countries do, have impacts. And I think it's really inspiring to see, you know, with the change of leadership in the US, for example, how, you know, we can really dramatically change industries. Like, in the last decade, solar has become cheaper than coal. Like, it's crazy. In the beginning, people were like, oh, solar power, it's going to be so expensive. Now it's one of the cheapest forms of energy. So technology and innovation enables us to kind of do those leapfrogs and get to that better place. But we also need leadership and people who are willing to be at the edge of their own comfort and really stand up to the bullies in industry who are not willing to, you know, be part of the future. Anyway, so if you haven't done your ecological footprint before, I highly recommend it. It's quite fun, actually. It's an online tool which you basically answer some questions about your lifestyle. It's a cute little animation, and it'll tell you how many Earths would be required if everybody lived like you did. And most of you are in North America, so it's going to be bad. I'm going to pre-warn you. It's going to be like 4 Earths. And what a great trick is to go back in after you've done it the first time and to play with the choices to see what changes you could make in your lifestyle to get to One Earth, or even just to get to two Earths would be good. But that's the thing, like, we don't have a lot of control over the impact of our actions because like the products and services that you buy already have their ecological footprint like locked into them. But you do have big choices about certain areas of your life. And so I'm sure you're familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. They came out in 2015. I was actually given a project from the United Nations to figure out how to make sustainable living desirable. I think the brief was make sustainable living irresistible. That's what they said. To anyone, anywhere. And I was like, it's a very complicated thing. So, so this project I did was really about trying to harmonize the reality that a lot of our environmental impacts, like whether it be climate change or the plastic waste issue, it actually comes down to consumption and consumption of our daily needs, like the things that we need to live our lives, no matter who you are and where you are on the planet. You need to eat food, you need to like have clothes and move around your city, and you need a bank account, and you need all these things. And so I wanted to look at how we could like activate people to make better choices within whatever power they had to make those choices. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this concept of the circular economy. The circular economy, which is basically about transitioning the current linear economy, which is our economy where it's based on waste, essentially, to one where waste products don't exist. And instead of having landfill and recycling, products are designed to be fully closed within a closed loop. Like I have a really good example here. This is a product called a Fairphone. This one looks a little outdated now, but it's a fully, it's a phone that can be taken apart. It's designed to be modular, and you can repair it yourself. You can buy the parts to repair it if you break the screen. And it's also fully recyclable, and it uses recycled materials in its production. So instead of like my iPhone, which I cannot get inside because it's proprietarily designed, these kinds of systems make it easier for products to be able to be taken back and reused and recycled, so that we minimize that negative environmental impact at the end of life. So those kinds of products and services are becoming really popular. There's jean companies like one called Mud Jeans, where you basically subscribe to a jean service, and when you're done, you send them back, and they either repair them or they recondition them. There's a huge company initiative of Unilever and TerraCycle in the US called Loop, which you can get all your groceries delivered in reusable containers now. So there's lots of examples of this. It's like the future, basically. So essentially, it's like the big innovation opportunity. Like, how do we design products and services that don't make waste? There's a huge opportunity for that, but at the same time, there needs to be pressure from like, in order for the companies and the producers and the designers to be motivated to be kind of taking the risk of designing these new systems, they need to see that consumer desire and demand, and we are seeing it. It is happening. It is basically here in the UK, I don't know what it's like over there, but actually, you know, in the US, it's pretty popular. Like, for example, there's a huge transformation right now around non-meat meat. Those things that are not actually from a dead animal, but they taste like it. The biggest IPO a couple of years ago was Beyond Meat, the fake meat burgers. If you haven't had them, it's quite surprising. It's really surprising how much they do look and taste like meat. But here in the UK, like veganism, for kind of like ethical reasons, not just about animal protection, but about like environmental impact, is huge. It's like it risen like 400% or 500%. So everywhere you go now, you can get like really amazing, you know, low impact food. So anyway, point is that this transformation is happening. I was lucky enough to make a project. This is a free project. If you guys want to learn some more about this, you can grab it. It's called the Circular Classroom. We have a link on my website too. I designed this for the Finnish education system. They wanted to teach their high school students how to design for the future. And so some of the things I was just mentioning to you, like this Fairphone, that's called Design for Disassembly. It's a strategy. There are lots of these design strategies and innovation strategies. And there are also circular economy business models that are designed to basically enable innovation to get to that sustainable and, like, you know, positive future outcome. So you might want to look into that. But yeah, what I wanted to tell you was about this project I did for the UN, and then I'm going to wrap up. So yeah, they gave me this challenge, and I did all this research around like, well, what impacts do we have agency over? Like, what kind of choices do each of us have in our day-to-day lives where we're not redesigning the products, but we can have choices? So I came up with this reference, mimetic reference, it's your hand. And the project is called The Anatomy of Action, because every day you take action with these little guys here. And we came up with these 5 categories that are the everyday lifestyle choices that we make day in, day out that have impacts. And I looked at, this is really nerdy, but I looked at the last 5 years of scientific papers that talked about these themes. And I created a matrix of like, well, what's going to have positive impact if lots of people do it? And we came up with these 15 actions. And we created this huge asset library of visual tools that people can share, and they're open source, Creative Commons. And right now, actually, if you go to Instagram, there's a little campaign happening where there's people all over the world, youth, young people, going through a 15-day challenge. They're covering each of the actions every day. So things like swapping your protein, figuring out how to grow your own food, and using all the food. Like, these sound really ridiculous, but we were able to show that these have valid scientific benefits if lots of people participate in these systems changes. And we all have the ability to do this, like ditching disposables, going beyond just buying, like figuring out how we can use services. These are all explained in a lot more detail on the website. I'm just giving you a quick summary. And then how we move around, not that we all move anymore anywhere, we just sit in our apartments and houses. But one of my favorites, and I love this because you can all do this, is divesting from banks that are non-ethical or banks that invest in fossil fuel. And nearly all banks do it unless you go for a bank that actively has a policy against it. And the thing is I'm sure, you know, being a student, you might be like, well, I don't have any money, so this doesn't apply to me. But I bet your parents do, or your friends do. But essentially, like, if you have a bank account that is with a bank that has an ethical investment policy, your money, even if you've only got $20 in the bank, is helping to invest in better social outcomes, better environmental outcomes. And it's like passive activism, basically. So if you can think of one thing to do after this, other than protein swapping, I recommend calling your bank and finding out if they have an ethical option, and if not, then finding one. There's lots of resources online now. So yeah, basically this toolkit is kind of like a flagship project now with a certain part of the UN helping to activate people around the world. This is just from today. They were just doing a little campaign, and you can see people promoting their actions and choices of how to be more sustainable. And I'll just wrap up by saying, like, the key thing that I've learned and that I always try to do is to do this thing called activating your own agency. So we live in a complex world, and a lot of the time the systems around us try to make us feel like we are not that impactful, both in the sense that our individual choices don't really matter, like the environmental problems are not our direct fault, but we are all participating in the world, right? So in some way we have some responsibility, but also in the sense that traditional education and our life experiences don't necessarily tell you that you can go and actively have a career filled with joy and money and make change. And that's something that I think is really important, is that if you're going to go into business and innovation and any of these things, that you can develop the integrity and commitment and your own kind of what we call sphere of influence to ensure that whatever you end up doing in your career is not only going to be beneficial for you, it's going to make you happy, but it's also going to have a positive impact on the world around you. So over time, we all have the ability to kind of expand our sphere of influence in a genuine way and have like those ripple effects, because if hopefully, if anything, my story will show you that one person who had no idea about anything figured out how to like help make really positive change all over the world. And that's been a really incredible thing for me and humbling experience to have. So yeah, there you go. That's my quick synopsis of my career so far.
Thank you so much. Oh, did we just lose you?
Oh, I should be here. Hang on.
There she is.
I just was unsharing the screen.
So thank you so much. Well, it's an honor and a privilege, and I'm always excited. Every time you talk, I was like, "Ooh, let's change the world with our own two hands." So Ben Harper and Jack Johnson are very happy with us. I do have a question, because you were one of the first ones in my life and in our design world. design thinking, one of the tenets of design is human-centered. And as hearing you talking, you are one of the first people that introduced me to the concept of eco-centered, and not putting our belly button and navel gazing in the center of it all. But for our young generation, and especially because you have the unschool, where do we start?
From a design perspective, you mean?
Or from whatever, because we always start with our belly button. We always start with our actions and our hands.
I mean, I think humans, you have to accept the fact that we are actually locked into our own perspective, because we live inside here and we look out through these things, and we have information coming in different sensory ways, whether it be we read or hear or whatever, taste. But ultimately, we look at the world through the same two eyes our entire life. So there is an element of us being kind of locked into our own experiences. And there are multiple ways that we can expand our understanding of the world. So obviously, you mentioned design thinking, like the concept of empathy, that is one of the key parts of the design thinking process, has been put in there to overcome the fact that for a very long time, designers designed for themselves. And we know this from like some really tragic case studies, like Siri being designed by a man. And when Siri was asked about how to respond to sexual violence, Siri didn't know that that was a problem because Siri had been programmed by a man. And so you have all of these, you can look this up. It was like a huge controversy when it was kind of identified. And it really helped expose the fact that the tech industry, especially Google and a lot of these big players, was 70% white men. So most decisions were being made by a very small group of people with a big group of people, but a segment of people who have the very same life experience. Of course, everybody's different, and they've had, some have had trauma and others not, but as in like, we're not bringing in that diversity of voices and perspective, then we're going to have very homogenous outcomes. Like you're going to have the same thinking. And that's one thing Einstein said, is you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that led to the problem. And so for me, and I didn't really talk about this in the presentation, but I use systems thinking, right? So like when I uncovered systems thinking, which is a way of seeing the whole before the parts, I basically was the second time my mind was blown, but that was the first time, was basically realizing that everything is interconnected, that the small bits that we look at, of course, it's really important to be able to see like the bits and how they fit together. But unless you have the full picture, unless you can also see like the big picture of things, you're going to have a very myopic perspective. You're going to be like locked into tunnel vision. And so I think that what I like about the human-centered design approach and the empathy stuff is that it helps us overcome our biases and our whatever our worldview and our kind of pre-existing understanding of the world is, to get that kind of flexible and agility. And like, I talk about this tool called lensing, and I imagine it like, like I can put on glasses and the world looks a little bit different, right? For me, just a little bit. But if you go to the theater, not that anyone does that anymore either, but if you've ever gone to see a show, you'll know that the emotion is created for the viewer by gels that go over the lights. So you start with a white light and they'll put like a blue gel over or a pink gel, and it creates an entirely different emotional experience, right? Like the blue one could be like icy, or it could be green one could be like envy, whatever. The thing is that we need to develop the ability to do that, like to see the world from perspectives that are not just our own lived experiences, and to understand that people have entirely different perspectives. And so therefore, when we're designing products or services or anything, we have this empathetic connection to other people in the world, not just our own perspective. So that's one thing. But the downside of that is that it unto itself does not create truly innovative solutions, right? Like just understanding a diverse array of people and their perspectives and being empathetic and having being motivated by equity and all these really important things doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome you get from that process is going to be a better solution, right? Like you need some sort of stress tester to ensure that you get that. And that's where I think the systems thinking is so important, is that enables you to see how problems fit together, like those babushka dolls, you know, like those Russian dolls. So you're not just seeing the outside one, you're seeing all of them together. And so that the solutions you come up with are kind of like, you know, like if you ever played a computer game and you have to like find the magic key that fits in the hole, it's like the right solution to the size of the problem. Without that, I think a lot of solutions are not necessarily the right fit. People like shoving the wrong size key in the hole and like trying to make it work. And that's what I think we see over and over again. And then sometimes we have these amazing breakthrough innovations that really do work. But for me, what's so important is that we learn to love the problem first. So I call it suspending the need to solve, because if we solve the problem with our current worldview, we often just do that thing where we use the same thinking, cause the same problem. So like breaking the problem apart and learning how to look at it differently, and then using a systems mindset, and then coming at it with a solution. And for those of you who will be doing the course that I'm running with you guys, we'll be going through that. This is the method that I created called the disruptive design method, which is basically this idea of like mining a problem, understanding what the F is going on before you then come at it with a solution, and using the systems approach to be able to put those pieces together in a new way, like a jigsaw puzzle, and then coming at it and building solutions that fit that problem that you've just explored. And certainly, you know, having used this method and taught it and have people all over the world using it, the difference that I see is like it's still doing the creative design thinking, but before you do that fun bit, you're like doing some not so fun but very important hard work that gives you this knowledge and foundation so that the shit you do is way better. Like, it is.
But in that sense, so in your path as an innovator, you almost talk about it as if it is accidental innovator. But what I find and work through your tools is that disruption is so intentional. It's really an intention to disrupt the status quo. So how do you prepare yourself as a young innovator, creative designer, engineer, whatever, to be purposefully disruptive? Why disruption is so
Honestly
important
and respectfully, right? Because disruption is not like running in a room and like bashing everything over and having a tantrum. Disruption is about intent. And you have to be smart to do it. Like all of the most disruptive companies that we, you know, the successful ones that we know of, they are like the 0.01%. And all of the other would-be disruptors we never hear about, right? Like that's one of the big problems with the startup world is we don't hear about the failures. And that means that we have this really false perspective on what it takes to actually get to the top. And if you look at it, I got really obsessed with looking into the startup culture a while ago. A lot of the big players that we argue are disruptors received like the phenomenal amount of money from one or two investors who had like really specific agendas. So the whole I can't remember the name of it, whatever. There was like one guy who invested a lot of money. And so sometimes, you know, just having a disruptive idea, sometimes being in the right place at the right time gets your idea out into the world, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean it was like the right solution. So there's multiple factors at play. But in the sense of what agency do we have as individuals who aren't going to get like $10 billion investments? Maybe you will. You could get that 10,000 that's on offer, which would be very, very, very useful. I think when you're starting something, $10,000 is a great amount of money to give it a go. Actually, my animation series, I got a grant for $10,000 and that spawned a lot of things. So it's amazing what a good chunk of cash can help you do early on. So I think the preparation, like, I mean, for me personally, I had to like have a coming out to myself about just being a disruptive person because I didn't understand that my like frustration with the world was because I didn't agree with a lot of the things that I thought. Like once I understood that everything was interconnected and that we were making a huge mess of things, then I had the tools and the vocabulary and the agency to understand that I didn't think, like I wanted to help make those problems get better so that we didn't have all of these ecological crises and stuff and equitable issues. So once I came to terms with that, I was able to then use whatever resources I have, and they've always been quite small, to kind of leverage change. And so I think that that's the concept of being disruptive is to be so I'm going to use this word here, intimate with the problem. Like I always say, you want to take your problem on a date and like ask it all the date questions. Because if you go on a date with someone, you're going to be like, so where did you grow up and what did you do? You're not going to be like, so let me design a solution for you, because that is not going to go very far. So if you really like intimately understand what's going on, then you have this like perspective and agency that helps you create solutions that will be that like what we call that pressure point, where you like can find that perfect spot in the system to make change. And for me, those early experiences I had, what I realized was like, and this is a quote from one of my heroes, Buckminster Fuller, who I think he stole from Socrates. You know, he says like, if you want to make change, don't invest your energy in trying to overthrow the old system. Invest your energy in designing something new that makes the old one obsolete. And that's kind of what I've realized. Like all of my wins in life have been where I've just gone and done something really uniquely and with the energy and like creativity that then inspires change. And so, you know, there's different ways of going about it. And I think certainly, you know, there are certain things that need like protest and activism and like, you know, confronting hard realities. But when it comes to a lot of the changes that we need to have with like how products are designed, how we get our services met, all of these things, like we need just really kick-ass creative solutions that make people be like, oh my God, I want it and I'm going to do that. Rather than be like telling people that the world is screwed and that they're all going to die, because that hasn't really worked for the last 25, 30 years. Nope. I don't know if that answered your question.
I have a question for you as well, Leyla, because I think what you're talking about is fabulous. I love the idea that you just jump in and create something and continue to expand it to make it obsolete. Where I'm finding our students are struggling is one, problem finding, and then two, it's the in-between time, throwing themselves into ideating and looking at where do I start once I found a problem, how do I actually start that ball rolling in a way that doesn't make you completely walk away, because I can't solve poverty. I can't solve.
So how do you activate? How do you get the momentum? And
absolutely, and moving them along.
And that's a problem. That's a problem that you have at any point in your career, or you know, like some of the best designers in the world will tell you about the project they didn't get up, or the struggles they had to get an idea out or a solution. Like this isn't, it's not like a thing you're going to have happen to you once. You just get much better at managing the lag time between the factors that are at play, right? So I have these like 10 rules of ideation that I made up, that I say the first rule is you learn rules so you can break them. And one of them I have is, I find that I've taught innovation for like 15, 20 years now. So I've heard all of the excuses. I'm not creative, or I've heard all of the like, my idea is the best in the world. And then I'm like, Google image search in 30 seconds. I'm like, sorry, it's been done 20 times, you know, had the full gamut. And one of the things I think is really important is that a lot of the time people get emotionally attached to their early ideas. And the problem with that is that your brain is engineered, all of our brains are lazy. Like they use a lot of our energy. They don't want to do the hard work. So what happens is you'll go, okay, brain, we're going to come up with a solution. It's going to come up with 5, and then you're going to get a little dopamine hit, right? Like that little Post-it note that gets picked. Whoop, you're going to get that dopamine, and your brain's going to be like, vacay. And the problem with that is that doesn't usually come up with divergent ideas, and divergent ideas happen when random things come together, and in that like moment create an entirely new possibility. To get to that, you have to do something I call pushing through the froth, which is a beer analogy, because I'm Australian and we really like to drink beer. So if you've ever been to a pub and you have watched someone pull a beer, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about here, right? So the beer comes out and it has the nice little head, and then you drink the beer. But when they change the keg to make the beer come, you get like 20 jugs of froth. The first 20 jugs of stuff that comes out of that keg is just going to be crap, basically. Can't drink it. It's got to go down the drain. And that is what your brain will do every time you come up with ideas. It will give you the most obvious, the easiest. It might be fascinating, it might be slightly different, but it's definitely not searching around the crevices of your creativity under the sofa looking for the last, possible idea. So I always say the first rule is to push through the froth, right? So that's usually the point where you think you've come up with a solution. And that's the point where you have to force yourself to come up with 5 more or 10 more or 20 more or whatever else and really push through that, because that's when you get to the delicious stuff. So that's one of my rules. And another one I'll tell you is another analogy that comes from Australia is, you all know what panning for gold is. Like in the gold rush, they used to pan for gold. They would like literally take a sieve and they would dunk it in the river, and they'd get all this dirt and stuff, and they would shift like this, and all the dirt would fall out, and then left on the pan would be a little nugget of gold. Like that's what panning for gold is. And so I think ideas are like that. So some people come up with so many ideas that they can't pick one, and then their plethora of ideas limits them because they love all their babies and they don't know where to go. Are you one of those? I see some nodding here. Yeah. I mean, I'm like that sometimes. I've gotten really good at not being like that anymore. Like I have this new theory. I'm like, all of my ideas are just like fleeting, so I can dispose of them if I don't need them. But anyway, so this panning for gold is the same thing. Like, come up with all your ideas, come up with lots of them, push through the froth, and then when you've got lots of them, you've got to sift through them and look for the gold. And there's a few different ways you can do that. One of them is talk to people about them, because you can tell pretty quickly if your idea is crap when you try to explain it. That's the first test. Can you explain it? And even if it's just like, oh, I have this idea to like create an animation series, and and if you can get some energy, or if people are asking you questions and they're interested, then often you can just tell that there's something there and that maybe you can work on it more. So there's other tools you can use, like you can like write them down and then weight them. You can do lots of different things, but you just want to agitate your ideas, and you want to be able to without being too precious about it, get rid of the ones that are not going to solve the problem. So you do get to one, because I've always said this: ideas in your head are pointless. They do nothing for anybody. 0 people get benefit from ideas in your head except for you feeling good about yourself having ideas. The only benefit you get is when you take an idea and you make it happen in some way, even if making it happen means that you then mess it up. Like you make a prototype, and like I've designed lots of games, right? And I have ideas for a game, and I'll go and I'll make a prototype and I'll play it, and it's a disaster. Like people are like, I hate this, I don't understand it. Very useful information. That information makes me figure out how to solve that problem. I would never get to the great outcome if I didn't go and test the ideas and prototype and play test and all that kind of stuff. So, the thing is that being precious about your ideas and not doing anything is not going to serve anybody. The only way you're going to get to the good idea, that's the valuable idea, that's either going to get you rich or healthy or happy or whatever else, is by doing shit in the world. And you're going to go through several stages of not achieving the best outcome before you get to the best outcome. Like, that is inevitable. If you get the best outcome on the first go, frame the moment, because it's not always going to be like that. Okay. And if you're always getting the best outcome every time, you're playing it way too safe, because then you're not actually growing in any way. Like, you're not actually, because the most important, ingredient for creativity is a little bit of stress. A little bit of anxiety, because it actually creates a cognitive experience where the brain is forced to kind of like solve the problem faster and be more efficient. Anyway, I think I answered your question, I hope.
And I want to chime in here, because I think that this is a good segue into one of the questions that we have. We have a lot of students here who are passionate about social causes, and they want to leave their marker. They want to get started in that area, but they're also understanding, hey, I have to make a living. Hey, I have bills to pay. Hey, I have all this other stuff going on. What advice would you give to students who are trying to marry their passion for social causes and the change that they want to see in the world with actually generating income?
Okay, I waitressed for like 12 years of my life. So, you know, I actually waitress and then I created a jewelry business to like get myself through university. So I'm all for the multiple streams of income and the side hustles and the, you know, fake it till you make it kind of approach. I think the thing is that nobody's useful if you don't have your basic needs met. So it is important that all of us look after ourselves in the sense that we are, you know, not we're not hurting other people, but we're also not hurting ourselves through our choices. I think it's just a good life skill to be respecting yourself and making sure that you have somewhere safe to live and that you have food that's nutritious, that's going to give you the brain power to do the cool things. So it is important to do that. But, you know, we have a certain number of hours per day and also a certain amount of energy and resources, and we can use them in different ways. So I think one of the key things to do when you are time poor is collaborate. So yeah, you might be like doing that, you know, your day job and studying and it's difficult, but if you can get more people together, then you have more resources and more like you know, that whole idea of being stronger in a group is truly true. But at the same time, not all collaborations work. And, you know, sometimes it's also not possible. I mean, we're in COVID time, so it's not like you can hang out with people. So at the same time, I think what's really important is to be realistic about your expectations for change. I obviously want to change the entire world, but the likelihood of me by myself doing that in my lifetime is probably not. I think I've got like can have to chip away at certain things, but it takes time to do that. And it's like you need to be in it for the long haul, and you also need to be seeing each incremental stage of your, like, you do a project, you learn something, you have one win, another one fails. It's all part of the process. So in 2 months, you're having like zero creativity because you're dealing with being laid off from COVID. Fine, deal with that. Like that's not going to fail you being a change maker and a creative person in the world. Like I have the same thing when people want to go vegan. I'm always like, don't go vegan first, go vegetarian, because if you go vegan, you are setting yourself up to fail. Like there will be a moment where there's bacon or there's cheese or something, and you're going to eat it. And then you're going to think, because I had that one thing, I've blown it. Like this is like, I've blown it all. I'm going to go back full Monty and just like eat all the hamburgers. It's not like that, right? Like it's not a binary thing. You know, you have, say you have your 100% of your energy, you know, you need to dedicate what, 30% for your own health and well-being, relaxation. You need 50% for generating an income so that you can live. And then you have this, sometimes you have 20%, other times you have 50% that you can spend on doing things. And then that's like, if you could just be like, what's the word? Like flexible about it. So you are always working towards getting to a better outcome, like over a long period. Then the small wins will be rewarding and they will come. That's the thing. I think the other thing is people often get disheartened when they try to do something and it doesn't work out the way they want. And it's hard. Like, let me tell you, when I first started that farm, I screwed up so many times. Like I created a fly farm. I watched a YouTube video on how to do no-dig gardens, and I went outside and I was all like, I made my little garden. I put cardboard down and I got the soil and I put it on top and I planted all the little babies and I watered them every day. And 3 days later, the plants were dead. And I had no idea what was going on. They'd all fallen over and were dead. And so I shoved my hand in the soil and there were these like disgusting white maggots everywhere. And I freaked out and I went and I looked it up online, and it turns out that I had actually created the absolute perfect breeding conditions for this very small fly, wet, high nitrogen soil. And they ate all the base of the plants and they then exploded into a little plague. And as I had to deal with that, I was very nicely reminded how good intentions don't always lead to the right outcomes, especially if you don't have enough information. And would I ever not have done that? Like, would I undo having done that very painful and annoying thing, which I then had to deal with all these flies for a few weeks? No, because it was in that experience that I learned so much, and it drove me to learn more about soil and how to do the right thing. And the next vegetable garden I created was brilliant, right? Because I was really, really annoyed at myself. So it was a really strong motivator. So I think, like, just to summarize, I think the key thing here is always try to do things, right? Wherever you can. But if it's only 10% of your time right now, don't beat yourself up about it. Work towards it being that you accumulate enough experience so that you can get that killer job or you can start that project. You know, respect yourself first. Make sure that you have integrity, which is about knowing what it is you're trying to achieve and sticking to it. And, you know, seek out collaborations where you can and see it as a long journey. You know, life is hopefully going to be long. You got a lot of time to figure shit out. So, you know, it's true. I mean, this is things I remind myself of. You know, this isn't a one-way advice cycle here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'd love to ask a question if possible, and then I think we've got another great student question lined up here as well. I'm kind of curious, you know, obviously you bring an incredible energy. You've done so many different things. You're really a serial innovator, and I think that's such a compelling example for a lot of us. But one of the other pieces of wisdom we often hear in the innovation and entrepreneurship world is that you have to ruthlessly focus on one idea. You have to prioritize and be selective. I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on how you think about balancing the impulse to do all the things with, you know, being judicious about where to best put your energy.
Well, I think if your one idea can be either your one innovation or it can be your one driving force. So for me, I have one idea, which is to live a sustainable and regenerative planet that humans have not destroyed. So all of the things I do are driven by that desire. So whilst they all seem a little chaotic, I'm always checking in with that. For me, it's my pilot light, right? Like, I don't do a project because it won't do that, or I do a really stressful project because it's going to help achieve that, despite it being like very taxing on me or whatever. So I think that your one thing can be like the one change goal, the one passion, or it could also be the one product. I mean, Elon Musk has two big things. He's got SpaceX and he's got Tesla. So, I mean, okay, he also came with all the PayPal money, and he's, you know, obviously like pretty, what's the word? Eccentric, I think the word is. So I don't think it's helpful to prescribe to like one, let's say, I don't know, philosophy or dogma of how to do innovation. I think everybody's different, and some people are meticulous, right? Like they're Excel spreadsheet type people, and they're amazing because they can methodically get things done. And perhaps for them, that one thing's very important because they, you know, but someone like me, I get bored easily. So if I have just one thing, I'll probably end up sabotaging it because I'm so bored, I want to move on to something else. So it helps me to have 3 or 4 things going at the same time. Also because I have this problem when I finish a project, I have post-project depression. Like, because it's so stressful. Like, you get to the end and you're like, yay, and then you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do next? So I just learned to kind of like back them up, which I've regretted at some points because it's quite stressful. But it also means I've always got lots of things going on, and I've got lots of things I'm thinking about, and I'm really motivated by, you know, having that momentum. So I think it's really important to reflect yourself and figure out what works for you and try a few different things on, like, you know, try some different approaches to creativity and to innovation and see, like, there are multiple different methods, multiple different approaches, and they're not like there's 69 people in this group right now listening, and there's just no way that one approach is going to be the right solution for all of them. And that's why, you know, programs like this are great because you're giving people lots of different opportunities and they can like self-select into the things that are going to be helpful for them. Yeah, although, look, I think that perhaps as well early on, it's important to get some wins under your belt, so to say. So perhaps focusing really succinctly early on to make sure you can get like a successful project up is probably a great way of ensuring that you then have the experience and motivation to kind of go to that next level.
You talked a lot about collaborating, and you talked a lot about let me back up. What I noticed with design thinking and systems thinking, it seems like you always have to be on mentally, right? You're either going to the store, you're on a phone call, collaborating with someone. You're always trying to connect the dots, find the opportunities, fill in the gaps. How do you mentally stay on? How do you refresh yourself? How do you not get frustrated, or do you get frustrated? How do you sustain some kind of balance and peace in your life when you're constantly solving problems?
Well, I haven't made any claims to having achieved that. I did farming for 3 years. I found that very useful. Like, I don't know if I actually can like really truthfully answer that, because
Can I say
think it's a
something?
struggle in other. So yeah.
Leyla, the more I read your materials, I like the fact that you always debunk myths. So like this constantly debunking, like, I don't know if that's even the word in English. Sounds good in Portuguese. But like eliminating looking at all the negatives and like refuting all of them. And that has been like a constant thing in my interactions with your work. Is that okay?
Well, I think the thing is that, yeah, and I think the thing is when it comes, I agree that it is exhausting constantly thinking about the world and its complexities, and I can't make consumption choices sometimes but no one can. That's the thing. We all have the same cognitive biases. The choice paralysis affects all of us. Like, one thing I always have found really frustrating is that when you have like a social or environmental agenda, when you are actively wearing your disruption on your, sleeve or whatever, people love to try and cut you down, right? They love to be like, oh, but you flew in an airplane. And I'm like, yes, because I went to go do this project, but I weigh up all the pros and cons. Like, I am making that choice. And so if anything, to be honest, the pressure that you experience, partly because you're in the do-gooder space, is from the exterior and being like, I want you to F up. I want to show that you're wrong, because it's confronting for other people. It's confronting for somebody to think that somebody else is making those choices or doing those things. But then there are also people who like to shame people, and then the shame can be a problem. Like, so I think to answer your question, I don't know. I try multiple ways of like not being constantly engaged cerebrally with the complexity of the world around me. I know that I have totally pessimism and optimism in a like delightful little battle inside me. Like, some days I'm like, oh God, we're completely screwed. But then my brain can't help but like, but yeah, Leyla, but we've been screwed in the past. Look at the history. Like, also, every time I think of like the social issues that we're going through right now, and I'm like, yes, Leyla. And 25 years ago was like the first time a woman was on the board of a Fortune 500 company, and now look what you get to do. So change is like constant, and we're in it. And so sometimes like we expect it to be tomorrow, but it's not like that, I think that's what I said at the beginning. One of the most important things is to hold hope for a positive future, but not be naive about it, but also not be completely paralyzed by the idea of a future. So I feel like those things, also stoicism, if like this whole idea that you can only control your reaction to things, helps as well. So like, I don't know. I don't think I can adequately answer this. I like clearly I'm still trying to figure this out for myself. I like whiskey, which is not good to recommend. Some of you are probably underage, so I don't know if that's the right answer.
No, I'm wondering if this might be a time too. There's something that I'm constantly saying with people, especially if they're in a change space, gently, right? And what we look at is recurring invitation, a space of recurring invitation, that it's like erosion. It happens over time. And these small bits, even with people that are resistant, to look at gently and creating spaces of invitation and an erosion over time, which creates evolution and reveals things. So I'm wondering, Leyla, if you might comment on how you create these spaces of invitation where people can participate without feeling chastised, without feeling like I can't do the whole thing, so therefore I'm not participating.
Well, maybe I'll answer that through an example. Like, so I saw there's a question there about like things I do in my own life. So I'm a vegetarian. I do eat a little bit of cheese, but predominantly I eat vegetables, healthy vegetables. They're good for my brain, they're good for my body, they're good for the planet. I love vegetables. I learned how to grow vegetables. They're very difficult. It's quite surprising, actually. Do you know how long it takes to grow a cauliflower? It's crazy. Anyway, so I want to get more people to eat vegetables in their life. I want them to love vegetables the way I love them. And so the way I did that on my farm was I used to have big lunches where I invited anyone could come. We used to have like 20 to 30 people, and we basically got them to cook. Like I set out chopping boards, and people would chop, like the husbands would chop, be like, have you ever chopped an onion? Can you chop this onion? And we'd make falafels. We made like all of these really unique and interesting samosas and things from things that they just picked from the garden. And these meals would be amazing, right? And everybody would be like, I can't believe I'm eating vegetables and it's so delicious and I'm so full. All of their misconceptions gone because they had an experience that rewrote their misconception, and the experience was enjoyable, so they participated willingly, right? So that invitation is about curation and experience, right? And it's the same with the unschool. Like when we run programs and I want someone to learn about systems thinking, of course I'm going to stand there and give them a mini lecture, but then I'm going to mess with them and get them to go. Like we did this project in Kuching where we wanted everyone to learn about gamification and the economy. So we made a game. Like we had 25 people. We got them to pull a shopping list out of a hat. They had 3 ingredients they had to get in a pair, and then they got to pull a note of money. And some people got like the equivalent of $1, and some people got the equivalent of $20. And then we were like, figure it out. And the whole group traded. Of course, economics comes in. They start trading. They start bargaining, and then we go back and we food to cook this lunch. And it was a hilarious thing because at lunch everyone's like, oh my god, I just learned about how economics works because of the experience. So like you just create the experience for the learning to emerge or the understanding to emerge. And so the same thing with sustainability. Like when I did that project, the Anatomy of Action, like sure, I'm going to tell you things you can do. And maybe 10% of you will go and do those things. And the rest of you will be like, never think about it again. Or in 2 years, you'll look at your hand and think, I'm going to call my bank. Like, because that's the other thing I've learned is that in system thinking, it's called a delay. There's a delay between things. Like when you're in the shower and it's too hot. And so you move the tap and it's still hot. So you move it again. And then, of course, you get like the double cold whammy. So you have to go back to that's delays. And all systems have delays. I think for me, like, when you want to get people to learn something, anything, and you want to get them to perhaps even change their behaviors or think differently, then having an alternative experience to what they're used to, so their status quo, is what is transformative. It is transformative. Experience is what transforms the mind. So I think for me, the key thing is don't tell people, invite them to experience it themselves. And yes, you might not get 100% confirmation, but I know for sure I've had so many people become like part-time vegetable lovers because of having incredible vegetable cooking experiences, right? And so, yeah, that's how I would answer that.
Fabulous. Fabulous. I think the short version is experience trumps.
Do you all want to eat some vegetables now?
No, I do agree with you. We talk a lot. So when we built our innovation series, it's mindset, experiences, big challenge. Mm-hmm. So it really grounds. Mindset doesn't shift until somebody has an experience and then you're putting this crazy operating system. It automatically uploads. And so I really like how you presented that. That was lovely.
I think it's important to always use yourself as like the beacon, because we are humans operating in the world. And so to reflect on yourself first and be like, what would I, like, how does this affect me? What would I do? Like, am I being really, what's the word, stubborn here? Or am I being too open? Whatever. Because I think one of the key things is that if you're going to create something like a product or a service or whatever you're going to create, you're going to be inviting people to engage with this new thing. And of course, we have all these traditional business approaches, you know, where you're testing the product and you're selling the product and you've got marketing funnels and MVPs and blah, blah, blah. And they're all great and useful. But at the end of the day, people come to a story. People literally buy things because they have a need, but because they have some sort of connection to what it is you're offering. And most human interaction is built on narrative. And this is actually one of the big problems we have right now, is that narrative is being extremely weaponized and distorted to enable particular groups to be successful. But I'm going to give you the example of what's going on in the stock market right now. You guys know all about this, the game shop that's going through the roof on the stock market, because you have 2 million people on a subreddit who are like, you know, playing with the stock market. And what this is doing is it's freaking out the establishment of people who own the stock, you know, who've always had it. And I think that what we're seeing play out is just another case of where, you know, action, contagious action can have impact, positive or negative, good or bad. You can storm a capital, you can like create like a social movement that's beneficial. Either way, like there's no, movements don't necessarily have judgments, they have outcomes. And those outcomes are what basically creates the next stage. I'm getting very abstract here, sorry.
No,
What I'm trying to say is that everything builds on everything else. So if you have new experiences, those new experiences build on others. Likewise, if you can construct an experience for somebody else to have in a way that challenges their own preconceived ideas, bust bias, helps them have a new understanding of something rather than reaffirming what they already believe, like getting more and more locked into their ideas, that's when you create change. And that can be embodied in a product, it can be embodied in an experience, it can be embodied in a talk, in a game. I mean, I'm a big fan of games. I think humans naturally want to play, not as in like, you know, playing kids games, but we like challenge and reward. And we respond very well to challenge and reward. And if you look at what's going on around the polarization that's happening at the moment, it's often being framed as like an us and them, which is what motivates so many people, because it's just it's like a sporting match, right? So when you look at the way humans behave, there's a lot of opportunity to construct experiences that motivate people to learn or engage with something completely new because they want to, because it's enjoyable, because there's a challenge or there's a reward, right?
No, I love how you address game changing. Nakaya, did you have one more question you wanted to ask?
I do, yes. So as someone who works in sustainability, right, every single day, I'm sure that you've heard every single excuse in the book as to, well, I can't do this because of X, Y, and Z, or, oh, if I do something, nothing is going to change. Like, I'm not going to be the deciding factor for the next 20, 30, 40 plus years of the world. So what would you say to people that don't believe sustainability is an issue? This is a question that we received from Luke.
I'm trying to think how to answer this without going on multiple tangents, because well, first of all, I like to remind people that they don't get to opt out of breathing. And as I breathe 20,000 times a day, I am breathing in the waste product of phytoplankton and trees, mainly phytoplankton in the oceans. And then I exhale a waste product that is then absorbed by other plants, because we are in a freaking interconnected system. And you can't, the only way you could, you can't survive and not be part of this system. It's just not possible. So it's not an option. Like, if it was an option, it would be easier. But the planet, and we are part of the planet. We came from the planet. We need the planet. If we move to Mars, we'd still have to figure out how to like get plants there and build a dome and like get them to all work together to create oxygen, because humans are in an interdependent relationship with things that photosynthesize, like the plant behind me. So, and I'm not saying that in a hippie way. I'm literally saying in that like a biophysical, hold your breath and try and see what happens kind of way. So that's the first step, that it's not an option. But the option that people take is, as you said, is like, well, what impact do I have? Okay, yeah, I care about the planet. In fact, all surveys show that like 90% of people care about the planet. They like nature, they don't want to destroy it, but they're not willing to change perhaps some of their behaviors because they don't see the relationship between their choices and the impact, or they feel that it's not fair, that they should lose something and somebody else will still do it anyway. That's another one. Like, well, my neighbor has the 4-wheel drive, so why shouldn't I have a 4-wheel drive? So I think the thing about sustainability is that we have a legacy problem, which is that historically, the environmental movement that came about in the 70s was very much at the same time as a pretty hilarious bunch of our parents, the baby boomers, have their hippie trips, right? Like tree hugging and this whole concept of being fringe and it being something that mainstream people don't do. And that legacy has permeated government, industry, and everyday people's lives. And that's a huge problem, because what it does is it says, if you are someone who suddenly realizes, or in their heart of hearts realizes that it's a good thing to like not destroy the planet, then, and you want to take action on that, people identify you as now being one of these hippie characters, right? And that is a huge problem, because it means that the CEO of a Fortune 500 company has this extra battle. Rather than just kind of implementing sustainability, he has to also convince everybody that he hasn't, joined a cult. So I personally believe that this legacy issue of like the old idea of what environmental conservation, all of that stuff is holding us back. And even like a week or two ago, the Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, he got up to announce new green policies, right? These huge green policies. And he was like, oh, we're not a bunch of hippies hugging trees and eating mung beans. And I was like, seriously, like this is still the legacy issue we have today, where the Prime Minister is saying like making environmental policies does not make me hippie. Yeah. So I feel like overcoming that individually and collectively, like one of the reasons I try to embody like a pretty contemporary person, my farm, it was contemporary, the design aesthetic, like I wanted it to be here and now, not this old idea, because we're trying to rewrite the script of what it means to be a human who is going to do well in life. They're going to have a job, they're going to do whatever career they're going to do, but they're also going to build into their DNA conscious and proactive decisions around not actively destroying the systems that sustain life on Earth. And we are seeing that, though. We are seeing this now. Lots of mainstream people like Boris Johnson or the heads of major corporations who are helping to rewrite that script. But I think we're in the middle of that. And so it's still very easy for people to be like, I don't want to be seen as one of those, so I'm just going to keep doing the status quo. And that's a huge problem, because the status quo is maintained by people not willing to change it. So yeah, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg.
Yeah. I love that, because one of the reminders, and and we're closing down here, but it's that we are also innovating language. We are also looking at, okay, so it's one thing to not like a term or like something, but then you have to replace it with something else, because we don't like there to be an absence. So to your point, make that term obsolete, right? Make those ideas obsolete, like sustainability with science and intellectual prowess, So I'm just aware you brought up so many great things today. I'm very grateful for your time. the students that are going
I'm
to
just watching the people like slowly drop off.
I know,
Like, oh
I
my
know.
God, this
But
moment is hurting
it's
my
fabulous.
head.
It's fabulous. Really, we've had a huge retention. And remember, people work here usually in hour time blocks. So
Oh,
actually,
I'm just teasing. It's totally fine. Just teasing.
so I want to thank you for your time. I want to tell you how much we're all looking forward to you working with our students. I wish we had opportunities for hundreds of students to work with you, but there are some things that they can do with your website, which I will let them know about once we end this
We
session.
have lots of free resources. There's some free classes on the Unschool Online and stuff. And there's also lots of videos that I'm explaining the methods and things all online if you're interested. But hopefully as well, if the students who are doing the course with us next week when we start, hopefully they'll get lots of tools that they can go and, you know, those collaborative groups you're talking about. Hopefully you guys can get that sweet 10K as a result of it. Who doesn't want some, money is a good motivator, but you know, it's actually not always the most motivation. People often like status and success, you know, so.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for the hard questions. I'm going to reflect on the one about my own personal, how do I turn off from all of the complex systems? Well, I must say, since COVID, my world got a lot smaller. Like all of us, our daily interactions have reduced phenomenally, right? Like in a day, I used to have like probably 100 times more activities than I do now. So I notice in general, I'm just a lot less stressed and I can make a lot more decisions because my brain isn't fatigued. Does anyone else notice that?
No, I think that's accurate. I do, again, we're looking forward to you continuing. I know we're going to have you again. The attendance was fabulous. The comments are fabulous. And what you say is so critical to how our students innovate. I'm hoping as a result of your session, many of our students will be able to create value propositions that then they could submit in that challenge for $10,000. I do want to announce for those who are still on that next week, our flagship Friday is Innovation from Poker to Produce. And it's with Clayton Mooney, who started his innovation journey playing poker. And
that's cool.
he has created a hydroponic operation and does lettuce that is distributed all over, certainly the Midwest, and was one of the recipients of a major grant and investment in an incubator. And so fascinating young person, you know, under 30, great innovator.
Well, that's a good example of someone who, like, you know, did their side hustle and then was able to parlay that into something, you know, a passion project. And that's the thing, like back to that earlier question, you just gotta figure out how to make it work for you.
Yep. So thank you, everyone today for being here, and we will see you next week. We do innovation anywhere. So bye.
Thank you, Leyla. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Fantastic
Thank
to
you.
connect with you.
Thank you.